Good morning. I'm back after a long absence. The absence included Thanksgiving, where our whole family came from all across the country. That was such a blessing. And then I had bronchitis for a while, and we had an apocalyptic plumbing problem. And then we just recently had Western Christmas, and this is all settling down. I did read some books during this time, so I'm not without resources. And so today we are going to discuss the short stories and four novels by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle about Sherlock Holmes. I was originally going to read this book. It is the annotated Sherlock Holmes, but it was just too much. It was a ridiculous idea, so I read a less heavy volume. The stories consist of 56 short stories that came out in the Strand magazine in four sets, and four novels, or novellas really, long short stories. They're really too short to be considered novels in my opinion. They were produced in the late 1800s in the Victoria era. And we all know these stories. We all know about Sherlock Holmes. We all know at least some of the stories, I think. But there's some interesting insights I think we can talk about. Anyway, we won't be going over every single one of these stories for sure. But the characters, Sherlock Holmes himself, he considers himself to be a consulting detective. That was not a thing people did back then. They didn't put a shingle up in their office like the detectives we see nowadays. But he was one of the first, although he was not absolutely the first. The first was probably Auguste Dupin by Edgar Allan Poe, his character. So anyway, he was one of the first, I guess you would call, the genius detectives, where the detective is a person who, by means of observation and rational thinking and deductive reasoning, is able to look at a thing and come up with an entire story to explain it, much to the amazement of everyone. Holmes certainly falls into this category. There are a few others too. We'll talk about them later. Holmes is actually arrogant and supercilious. He's not always very likely, but he is heroic. He's also takes cocaine when he gets bored and plays the violin. So that's Sherlock Holmes, main character in our series today. Then another two, his sidekick is John Watson. He's his roommate at 221B Baker Street, and he is the narrator. And then there's Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. He and Holmes are rivals. Holmes tends to think Lestrade is an idiot, and Lestrade thinks Holmes is a jerk, really. The bad guy in the story is Professor Moriarty. He's like this master criminal who controls all the crime in London. And then there's a couple of side characters that don't show up too often. Mycroft Holmes is Sherlock's older brother. He's even smarter than Sherlock Holmes, but he is quite lazy. And so if there's a case that comes up that he's too lazy himself to solve, he takes it over to Sherlock to work on. Mycroft has some mysterious secret job with the British government and is probably an extremely important person. And then there's Mrs. Hudson, who is the landlady. I think she owns 221B Baker, that whole building. And she brings food up, mostly breakfast. They eat a lot of breakfast. A lot of discussions and conversations and exposition on these stories take place over breakfast. So here's what a typical story is like. Holmes and Watson are eating breakfast and looking through the newspapers, which was the internet of their day. And he would dazzle poor Watson with an amazing bit of deductive reasoning. And poor Watson always says, "Oh yeah, I guess I could have figured that out myself." And then Holmes says something pretty insulting to poor Watson. And then a client wanders in distress and tells an amazing story, a troubling story, and begs for Holmes' help. And then the next thing we know is Holmes and Watson are on a train on their way off to a country mansion, which is the center of this particular mystery. Lots of train rides in these stories. Almost every story involves some train rides. And then Holmes noses around, does some inexplicable things, and solves the case, and Lestrade is vexed. So, as I say, there are 56 short stories, and I'll just talk about one. This one's my favorite, one of my favorites, but The Red-Headed League. This is a case of a man comes to the 221 Baker Street, man with flaming red hair, and he has a perplexing story to tell. It turns out that he read a newspaper ad that said that all the red-headed men were invited to come to a certain location in London and be hired for a simple job that would pay a lot of money. So all you redheads come and try out for this job. So he went and he immediately got hired. And the job was he just sat in a room by himself and copied out the encyclopedia. And it seemed like useless work. And then one day, after a few weeks of this, he goes to his job and the door is locked and nobody's home. So that's the end of that. So he's wondering what it was that he was involved in, and he asks Holmes to help him solve this mystery, this puzzle. So Holmes goes to the pawn shop, looks around, recognizes Jabez's new assistant. He recognizes him as a criminal that he knows of. And so he figures out through hitting the street with his cane, there's a hollow sound, and he realizes that the tunnel is being dug from the basement of the pawn shop across the street to a bank, a vault underground that is about to receive a lot of coins from France. So he knows that day there's going to be an attempt to dig through the basement of the bank, and so he and the police are on hand, and the crime is thwarted. And that story turns out to be adapted from a real robbery. So this story was kind of whimsical because when the redheaded man, Jabez, goes to try out for the job, the whole room is just full of red-haired people. It's kind of funny. So now we'll talk about the four novellas, which they're not as enjoyable as the short stories, in my opinion. The first one he wrote was A Study in Scarlet. This is probably the most atypical thing of the Sherlock stories because half the story takes place in Utah amongst some predatory Mormons. Unusual story. And then there's The Sign of the Four. A lot of these stories involve things that took place in exotic lands, because this is during the age of the British Empire, which was in some exotic places. And so things would happen in India or Burma or somewhere, and there would be ramifications. There'd be consequences back home in England, often involving jewels or treasures or revenge, things like that. This is one of those stories. Downside to this, and it's a pretty good story, but the downside is the Andaman Islanders. I don't know if you know anything about the Andaman Islands. They are an island in the Indian Ocean and hasn't had much contact with civilization, and the people are rather Sherlock Holmes barely thought they were human, and he said some very, very negative things about these people who live a primitive life, and it's kind of painful to read, but those were the days when that was a common way of thinking. Then there was The Valley of Fear. This is more problems in the American West. These novels the four novels often take place outside of London. It seems like Conan Doyle really liked an excuse to talk about the American West. And a lot of the characters in his short stories even are rich American oil men from Texas. Sometimes they're the bad guys, sometimes they're the good guys. And then the fourth one is the one we all know about, The Hound of the Baskervilles. And it is a spooky story. It takes place in a mansion on the moors, which is like a swamp in northern England. Kind of scary. There's a dog, a hound, that wanders around howling. It seems like it glows in the dark. There's a family curse for the Baskervilles family, and you're supposed to imagine there's something supernatural going on, like a spirit dog or something. But like all Sherlock Holmes stories, there's a rational explanation. This one actually has like a Scooby-Doo cartoon ending where the hound turns out, well, I won't tell you. But if you're familiar with Scooby-Doo, you know that if there's a ghost, it's really just somebody in a sheet with Day-Glo paint. But this story is very atmospheric, and it's spooky all the way to the very end when the conclusion is a little anticlimactical because we are hoping for ghosts. So this is an example where the solution to the problem turns out to be kind of a nothing burger, really. This is an example that describes this entire genius detective genre. The great man is usually an atheist, or at least an agnostic. He doesn't want to hear about any kind of supernatural explanation for anything. And he always usually has a credulous sidekick. In this case, it's Watson. But other examples, Auguste Dupin, who predates the Sherlock Holmes stories. And in fact, the Sherlock Holmes is somewhat based on Dupin, written by Edgar Allan Poe. He has a worse personality than Sherlock Holmes, actually. And he has a sidekick who's a narrator who is always the recipient of, "Oh, you're such an idiot. You don't know as much as I do." So the great men in these stories has to be the smartest man in the room. And then there's Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie. Now, Hercule Poirot is actually a rather lovable character. And he is a Catholic. It comes out in one story that he has a devotion to the Virgin Mary, which is good to hear. And his sidekick, who he is very rude to, is Captain Hastings, who is not very smart, it doesn't seem. And Hercule Poirot never misses a chance to let Captain Hastings know what an idiot he is. And then in more modern times, there's Nero Wolfe and his sidekick, Archie Goodwin. Now, Archie is smart too, but Nero Wolfe is the genius who has to know everything. And some of these are really big on never leaving their house. There's a lot of thought, especially with Nero Wolfe and Hercule Poirot, that if they just sit in their chair by the fire and think, exercise little gray cells, as Hercule Poirot says, that they can solve all the problems just by thinking hard. Nero Wolfe almost never leaves his New York apartment, and Archie runs around and does things for him. And another modern one is Hawaii Five-0, Steve McGarrett. He's smart, he knows everything, and his sidekick is poor Danny Williams, Dano, Bookham Dano, Murder One. Dano's always made to look a little mentally deficient compared to the great man, Steve McGarrett. So this is a result of Enlightenment thinking, the age of reason, which values empirical evidence, scientific method, a rational approach to life. It's kind of comes out of the Industrial Revolution, where everybody was expecting progress. You see a lot of that today. Sure, you would be surprised to know that Conan Doyle, whose hero, Sherlock Holmes, definitely an atheist, but Conan Doyle himself, because of some events in his life, believed in fairies. He believed in spiritism, and he actually fell for a hoax. It was the, what was it? The Cottingley fairy stories. There was these hoaxers who, in the early days of photography, had pictures of themselves with these pictures of cut out from books, these fairies kind of on the thing. And it convinced a lot of people, including Conan Doyle, who was a doctor, let's remember, that there really were fairies. And that was all debunked. So it's hard to hang on to that rationalistic attitude 100% all the time when you see strange things in the world. So Conan Doyle grew to hate Sherlock Holmes. He thought he wanted to write about other things, and he did write about other things. He wrote some other stories too, including a story about dinosaurs. And so he killed him off. Holmes went to Switzerland. He was avoiding Moriarty, the master criminal, and they climb the mountains, and they both have a wrestling match, so to speak, and they both fall off the Reichenbach falls, and that is the end of Sherlock Holmes, or so Conan Doyle thought and hoped. But due to public outcry, he had to bring him back, and so then there's another whole set of series of stories where he's made a comeback. So there's a lot of TV shows, movies, and everything, because these stories are all they're all in the public domain now. So the 1939 to 46 Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce made a lot of Sherlock Holmes movies, and but they weren't exactly canonical ones. I mean, some of them took place in World War II, for instance. But they're fun to watch. The better ones, in my opinion, are the ones by Jeremy Brett, 1984, British TV series. They produced 41 episodes that were all actually based on real stories. And in my opinion, Jeremy Brett was the perfect Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he can never be topped. He's better than Basil Rathbone, who wasn't too bad. So that is Sherlock Holmes stories, which I enjoy a lot. But I like a little enchantment in some of my stories. You know, I'd rather read Tolkien than Conan Doyle, a completely different genre. But anyways, you don't have to read them all. Some of the stories are not very good. Some of them are really good. And I think you might enjoy them. You can, they're all free online to read. And if you want to listen to them, there's a really good reading of them, of all 56 stories and 4 novels. There's a man with a lovely English accent, not AI, reading them for you on YouTube if you want to listen. So that's it for it. That's it. I have 2 more books. Well, I haven't been completely idle since Thanksgiving. I have been reading. So I have a couple more books to in the chute. So I'll be coming up with shows for them pretty soon. Thank you, and God bless, and go read some good books.